if I was to think of all the practices I've ever learned and think of them in terms of how much you get out of them for a small amount of effort you need to put in to get the result, then right up there in my top three would be the following. It's using your body to create the state that you want to feel. Now, let me share with you a couple of amazing studies. Now, as I'm talking here, you might have noticed that I'm sitting upright, and that's intentional. I've trained myself to do that anyway, but I'm intentionally doing it right now because here was one of these groundbreaking studies. It was done by researchers in New Zealand who randomized a group of people into two groups. Now, one group were allowed to sit in a slumped kind of posture for about 20 minutes. The other group were asked to sit upright for 20 minutes. Now, to make sure they stayed in those postures, they actually taped them to the chair. You know that kinesiology tape, that kind of KT tape, the kind of stretchy stuff. It's usually blue, but you can get it in lots of different colours, and you use it to tape up muscles if you've had like a sporting injury or a muscle strain. And they taped them to the chair to make sure that they sat in that upright posture. But here is the thing, amazingly, after just 20 minutes, those who'd sat in the upright posture for that time, compared to those who'd sat in a slump posture, they felt more positive. They actually had more energy. They felt less stressed, and they even felt a greater sense of self-esteem. Now, in a written exercise, when they analysed, the researchers analysed the language, those who'd sat in an upright posture had actually used much more positive language, versus those who'd sat in a slump posture actually used more negative language. And then they sprung on them an extra part of the study. It's called a social stress test. And what they had to do was deliver a presentation. And amazingly, but I suppose unsurprisingly now, given what I've just said, those who'd sat in the upright posture gave more positive, confident and better presentations than those who'd sat in the slump posture. Isn't that amazing? I mean, think of, before you give a presentation, sometimes we sit in a slumped way because we're feeling nervous. Or if you're going for a job interview, you might sit in a kind of closed, slumped posture because, again, you might be feeling a bit apprehensive or nervous. But in actual fact, if you sit in an upright posture, preferably keep your back straight and your shoulders back and relaxed, then it actually helps you feel better. Now, the first study that was popularised in this field was power posing. When Amy Cuddy's team at Harvard got people to stand like Wonder Woman or Superman just for a couple of minutes, compared with people sitting in a kind of closed slump posture, and they got some of the same results. People felt more positive. It even reduced stress hormone levels and boosted levels of hormones that are associated with confidence and self-belief. They also gave better presentations than those who'd sat in a slumped manner. But anyway, coming back to the New Zealand study where they taped them to the chair, sitting upright or slumped, they also did something very similar for a group of people who'd been diagnosed with mild to moderate depression. And again, they found something very similar. Those who'd sat for the 20 minutes in the upright posture had a boosted mood compared to those who'd sat in the slumped posture. They also felt more energised. In other words, they felt less fatigued. And they also, incidentally, the researchers noted that they had a lower amount of self-focus. Now, when we're struggling with our mood, when we feel, say, depressed, for example, and I've been through depression at one part of my life as well, we tend to focus more on ourselves because naturally, because of how you feel, you have an increased self-focus, and that's one of the characteristics of feeling depressed. And what they found in this study, just by sitting upright for 20 minutes, was a reduced self-focus from simply having sat upright for 20 minutes with your back taped to the chair to make sure that you do it, kind of thing. Now, there's a reason why this works this way. I'll explain in a moment, but let me share with you one more really cool study that was done. Researchers said, okay, it can't just be about sitting upright or standing upright even, because we move around a lot of the time. So what about if we have a more upright posture as we walk, compared to, slouching, slumping, and because oftentimes we just slouch and slump when we walk because that reflects how we feel. And sometimes we're walking along looking at our phones, which is a kind of slumped posture. So again, they asked people to walk upright versus walking freely in a more slumped posture for a set period of time. And again, the results were very similar. Those who walked upright for the period of time felt more energized. They had a much more positive mood. They even felt they had a greater sense of power, like they felt more powerful. And incidentally, they also had reduced blood pressure. Now, you might be wondering, so how does it work? Why does it work this way? Well, here's the thing. There is a synchronization between how you feel on the inside and how you wear that, to use that kind of language, how that appears on the outside. In other words, that's why you smile when you feel happy. You don't remember to smile. You don't feel good on the inside and say, wait a minute, is there not something I'm supposed to do with my face when I'm feeling good? Oh, aye, smile. You don't remember it. It's like a reflex. It's an automatic reaction. Similarly, if you feel stressed, you might tense up. You know, the corrugator supercilii muscle gets tensed, your shoulders tense, your jaw tenses, but the body tenses up as it reflects, or in a sense, you wear on the outside how you feel on the inside. But when I said that there's a synchronization, in science we call it bidirectional, and that means it goes both ways. So yes, it is true that how you feel on the inside you wear, in a sense it's visible on the outside. What you do with your body can actually, and does actually, impact how you feel on the inside. In other words, you can change your state on the inside by taking control of your state, of your posture and body on the outside. I mean, studies show that even just intentionally smiling can actually lighten your mood. Sitting up, that's why sitting upright makes you feel more positive and energized, because if you're sitting slumped, that's the kind of thing that you do when you're feeling tired, when you're feeling low mood. And so if you're feeling tired, feeling low mood, then you tend to do that. So what this bidirectional relationship means is, by doing that, you will actually feel more tired and it will lower your mood. And that's kind of what those New Zealand studies actually showed, because those sitting slumped actually felt lower mood and they felt more tired as a consequence. So the reason why sitting upright and standing upright and walking in an upright fashion makes you feel more positive and energized and deliver a greater sense of power, and also can impact self-esteem in the long term, is because these are the ways that you hold and move your body when you're feeling these positive ways in the long term. So if you practice, and I say practice, and I'm going to make a few suggestions in a moment. If you practice relentlessly adjusting your posture to impact your state on the inside, if you practice enough, it's like training for a sport. It's like, you know, if you want to run 5K, you don't just walk around the block once and say, you know, how is it I can't run a 5K in 30 minutes or 25 minutes or 35 minutes? You know, I've trained, I walked around the block once or twice, because oftentimes we're assuming that all these personal development things, they don't work because I've tried them once and they didn't work. And that's a common kind of experience for people. But in actual fact, self-development techniques are just like anything else. You've got to work at them. You want to improve at whether it's a sport or an art form, you have to practice. So similarly with this, if you practice taking control of the state of your body as you hold and move your muscles on the outside, then that will impact your state on the inside. And it's about practice, practice, practice. So here's a practice I would suggest for you, just to convince yourself. Have a wee go at the upright versus slouching study. Do it for yourself. Actually, try slouching for 10 minutes and notice how you feel, right? And then sit up straight for 10 minutes. Now, you might be able to hold that for 10 minutes depending on how much slouching you actually do. Set your watch or set a wee clock. Or it might be easier just to get a wee bit of tape or a scarf or a belt or something and just kind of tape your body to the seat. And just do that for 10 minutes and notice for yourself how you feel. Notice what your energy feels like after the slouching versus the sitting upright, and notice how you feel. Notice how your mental and emotional state feels, and just notice your general energy levels. Now, if that convinces you, try the next part. And this next part, for me personally, was an absolute game changer. I wrote a book a few years ago called I Heart Me, The Science of Self-Love. And it was like a couple of year-long experiment on myself because I was chronically struggling with self-esteem. Despite the fact at the time I'd written half a dozen books. But, you know, as many of us know, and I know I'm speaking to some viewers who can relate to this, we often, how we show people, how we appear on the outside to people is often, especially at work and as we interact, can be quite different from how we actually feel on the inside. And it's only in our private moments when we admit to ourselves that I don't really feel that good. I'm kind of struggling in my life in some areas, and it's not really what people don't know about it. And I was certainly struggling, and I was certainly struggling with my self-esteem, and I learned about the research here, and so I was relentless with it, and it was an absolute game changer for me, and it became one of the cornerstone sections. Like it became like 20% of the book was all the research on how to actually use that. If you're interested, go check it out. It's called I Heart Me, The Science of Self-Love. I'm not trying to overly promote it. I'm just saying, for me, this technique was an absolute game changer, and what really accelerated it for me was the following. So I put a timer on my watch to ping me several times throughout the day. So maybe every couple of hours. I put a timer on my watch, on my phone actually, it was my phone at the time, and I put a timer to ping me consistently. Sometimes it was every hour, sometimes every couple of hours, depending upon what I was doing that day. But every time the phone pinged me, I was to notice my posture, and oftentimes I was like that. I remember one time early on in my experiment on myself, the phone pinged me and I was in the queue in a coffee shop. And you know what I was doing? I was like that. I was kind of standing slumped. I was looking at my phone, and it was just betraying how I was feeling, a bit kind of self-conscious, standing in a queue in a busy coffee shop on a kind of damp day. And immediately I stood up straight, and I straightened my spine. I used to think of it as like, you know, if you're taking a bicycle pump and you pump up the tire. Well, think of pumping up your spine. So actually imagine like a bicycle pump, and you're lengthening your spine. Give it an extra centimetre of length just to keep it really upright, and relax your shoulders. And I'd keep my head up. And for the duration of the time until I got served, I just focused on my breathing. And that was a game changer. Every time I went to the coffee shop, I remembered to do the same thing. You know, because I write a lot of my books in coffee shops, so I spend a lot of time in coffee shops when I'm in the writing flow. But no matter where I was, if I was walking, if I was sitting down, if I was at a meeting in conversation, if my phone pinged, it was a reminder to either walk upright or stand upright or sit upright, but can take charge of my posture and how I'm holding and moving my body. So in a way that I was saying, what state do I want to feel right now? Okay, what would my body be doing if I felt that way? So, okay, let's do it with my body. And remarkably, it only takes like 30 seconds, a minute sometimes, to have a dramatic impact on how you feel in the moment. But here's the thing, if you keep doing it, if you become relentless, this is why I say keep pinging your phone. See, within a couple of weeks, you'll notice that your posture will become much more consistent. You'll not even need to rely on a ping. The way you hold and move your body becomes a habit. And therefore, what else must become a habit? If you're holding and moving your body in a way that says, I'm feeling in a positive, bright, optimistic, upbeat state, if that's the state you wanted, for example, then what do you think you're going to feel on the inside? Exactly. So the more you do the physical work, the training yourself to adjust your posture on the outside, the more that impacts how you feel on the inside, until how you feel on the inside becomes much better and much more stable. Isn't that so? Honestly, when I first learned this, I was relentless. I literally was relentless. I kept it up, you know, for at least, I think it must have been a month or more than a month. And when I say I kept it up, I kept pinging myself. After that time, it was an ingrained habit, and I didn't ever have to ping myself again. Just simply, people actually noticed when I was giving talks, they said, "You look taller." And it made me smile on the inside, because it made me wonder how I held my body prior to that. but people noticed an abrupt change to how I was standing. Loads of people thought I looked taller, but they didn't know why. They just thought, are you wearing like padded shoes or something? But people just thought I looked physically taller. And I think people perceive something in our body language that reflects how we feel on the inside. So it's, as I said, this is why I said it's one of the most powerful things I've ever learned. For what you gain, given the effort, the small amount of effort, in terms of it's an easy practice. You don't have to think complicated things or tell yourself things. You literally just have to adjust your posture, and it doesn't really take all that long. And each time you do it, it's just a couple of seconds to make the correction. This is why I said it was an absolute game changer, one of my all-time most powerful techniques I've ever learned. So give it a go. If you think if this technique speaks to you, give it a go and see how you get on for yourself.